Okay, this is notes for first test, over test 1, 2, and 3. Here are the notes if you want to follow with me. And this is notes over chapter 1. The government, all government, whether it's democracy or dictatorship, will do certain things. It will maintain a defense, provide for the public goods, and so on. And then it's dropped down here to linkage. Remember, linkage is what links you to the government. It could be an interest group, a political party, the idea of voting, and so on. Okay, public policy. That is what the government likes to do. Sometimes it means them doing something, and sometimes it means that they are not going to do something. Both are classified as a public policy. And let's go on down to the two types of equality. Equality of opportunity here means that the government will not put anything in your way and will allow you to develop your own talents, but they will not promise you anything. Now, equality of results means the government will promise a result, even though if they have to reorganize the money and they will guarantee certain things will happen. One most fundamental items of a democracy is that the majority rules. And hopefully the majority rules, but they will protect the rights of the minority. Now there's three types of interest groups theories. The first one is what you need to know. This type says that interest groups are good. And then there's another theory that they are controlled by the rich and powerful and not that good. And of course, the last theory is that they develop gridlock, which means that the government will just stop doing anything because they're afraid who will vote against them. And let's move down a little bit to chapter 2. And of course, John Locke, natural rights, everyone's born with certain rights. Human rights, this is when the founding fathers thought that the people would go after their own self-interest and try to accumulate wealth and power. And then, of course, the revolution started and they needed a constitution. So they have developed the Articles of Confederation, a lot of just different just a lot of different state laws, state constitutions. But all right, going back to the Articles of Confederation, it did last 10 years, but there was some weaknesses, and there you can see the weaknesses. Did not have an executive branch, could not tax, and it had to have a majority, had to have a unanimous vote to change the Constitution and so on. So be familiar with those, and if they give example which one is or is not, you can find it. Shea Rebellion proved how weak our government was. It's almost a rebellion that overthrew the government. So it was something that showed that we did need to do something about the type of government we had. And so as this conversation was going on, James Madison was writing the Constitution, and he was afraid of what we call factions. That means a group of people trying to influence the government. We would call them interest groups today. He thought that this was a natural thing, but it could be controlled by a representative type of democracy, which is also called an indirect type of democracy. And some of his theories is called Madisonism, and that was his theory of factions, separation of powers, and checks and balances that we'll talk about a little bit later. The founding fathers' main purpose on the Constitution was to actually protect individual property, and the way it started off. And of course, they had several problems. Representation in Congress, that they settled that by the Connecticut plan, where there'd be two houses. Slavery, versus Congress controlling trade. They sell that by letting Congress control trade, but they could not outlaw slavery for 20 years. Could we tax slaves as property, or would we count them as population? This was decided by the 3/5 compromise. 3/5 of each state could be one of each. And who are the people going to vote for them? They decide to let the president be picked by the electoral college, the senators to be picked by the state legislature, and only the House of Representatives would be picked directly by the people. And now we get to some of the things that we talked about earlier, separation of powers, checks and balances. There's a chart of that at the end of these notes. This is what Madison came up with to prove to the delegates that a president would not become a king. Separation of powers. He had 3 branches of government. Each one would have their own power. And of course, checks and balances would be that if he gave one branch of power, he would give another branch power over that, like passing a law, vetoing a law, overriding the veto, and so on. So we finally passed the Constitution, but there was a fight between the Federalists who supported the Constitution and the Anti-Federalists who thought there was no personal freedoms in the Constitution. And they came up with the compromise by promising that the first Congress would put all the personal freedoms in the Constitution. The Federalists wrote some Federalist papers. 10 is probably the most well-known. It's about factions and representative government. Madison, Hamilton, and Jay was the ones who wrote most of it. And a lot of the philosophers believe that the Federalist Papers is one of the most single best interpretation of the Constitution. And we go on down the low. At the very end of something we did not talk about in class, but I believe there is a question over it. Formal and informal amendments. Formal means it's in the Constitution, and this is in Article 5. It says an amendment would be passed by 2/3 of the Congress and 3/4 of the state. So that is the way it's done in the Constitution. But there is an informal, which we'll talk more about when we talk about the judicial branch. That means every time the Constitution did not say it was okay to burn the American flag, but a Supreme Court decision said it was okay. So that kind of changes the Constitution. So that's why it's called an informal amendment. Okay, let's go to chapter 3, which most of the questions will come from. Federalism. You got to know the definition. Is when the government shares with the states power. Some powers are in the federal government, some are in the states, and some are shared. There's 3 types of government. One type where all the power is in the federal government, and then another type would be all the powers are in the state. But ours is in the middle. Ours takes a little bit of both sides of that. Now, the supreme law of the land is the Constitution, and the powers in the Constitution are called inalienable powers. And the state gets its powers from the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment says that the state has all the powers except those given directly to the federal government or denied the state. They have all the rest of them, and that's in the 10th Amendment. Okay, go down here. A couple court cases. The Maryland case set up what we call implied powers. It's also called the necessary and proper clause, and also called the elastic clause. It means implied powers means that the federal government has the right to pass a law to enforce a constitutional law. And in this exact case, it was when The Supreme Court said that the states could not tax or interfere with a federal building, and that was what the court case was about, but it actually set up implied powers is one of the main things. Another court case that we'll study later, but there's a question on your test, is the Madison case. Madison case set up judicial review, which means that the federal courts have the power to declare laws unconstitutional. That was, we weren't sure that was the case until this court case came up. And like I said, we'll study a little bit more about that later. That's all you really need to know. Now, full faith and credit means that every state must respect the laws and court cases settled in all the other states. So if a court case is against you in Oklahoma and you move to New York, you still have to obey that court case. All right. We have dual federalism, which means the federal government and states do not necessarily get together for a project, and that was true before the Constitution. But after the Constitution, we went to incorporated federalism, which means that the federal government and the states will work together and on projects. And this is what that sentence is right there. Okay, hopefully you're following along with your notes. It makes it a lot easier. And we talked about block grants, which means they're a block of money for like improved transportation, so you have some flexibility. It has less strings attached, so the states kind of like it a little more than the grants that for a specific project that has a lot of strings attached to it. And then let's see, we have unfunded mandates. That is when the federal government makes the states do something, but they do not give them any money. Of course, the states hate this, and the federal government likes it because they can do some what they think are good things, but it won't cost them any money. All right, here's a picture of the separation of powers. Now, those are the three big blocks. Now, checks and balances are the little arrows there that kind of show how we check and balance those. And at the bottom, there is a chart. Here are the express powers, also called the enumerated powers that the federal government has. Reserve powers the state has, and concurring powers is the powers that they both share. Okay, this is pretty quick. I try to keep it within 13 minutes. Hopefully that gives you an idea of where to spend a lot of your time.